In the sleepy village of St Mary Mead, where roses bloom and secrets fester, a single locket sparks a chilling cascade of mysteries. Who slipped a cryptic note under a manor's door, threatening to devour the present with the past? Why does a vicarage garden hide a key to wartime betrayals? What poison wilts prize petunias and claims a life at the village fete? As Miss Jane Marple, with her knitting needles and razor-sharp mind, unravels blackmail, break-ins, forgeries, and a deadly smuggling syndicate, each clue, a cigarette's acrid scent, a hidden diary, a whispered threat, pulls her closer to a mastermind lurking in the shadows. Will she stitch together the truth before the village's harmony unravels forever? Dive into a web of deceit where every petal hides a poison and every heart a secret.
Chapter 1. The Whispered Invitation. In the drowsy heart of St Mary Mead, where hedgerows whispered secrets to the wind and cottages huddled like old friends sharing confidences, Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking a rhythmic counterpoint to the distant chime of the church bells. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where leaves pirouetted in golden spirals, and the air carried the faint tang of wood smoke from chimneys long accustomed to guarding village tales. Miss Marple, with her bird-like eyes and a mind sharper than the thorns on her prize roses, had just finished unraveling a particularly stubborn knot in her wool when the postman's bicycle crunched up the gravel path. "Afternoon, Miss Marple," called out young Tommy Pierce, his cheeks flushed from the uphill pedal. He handed her a cream-colored envelope, sealed with a wax crest that gleamed like a forgotten jewel. "Special delivery from Gossington Hall. Looks fancy, must be important." Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles, peering at the elegant script. "Thank you, Tommy. Mind the puddles on your way back. They're deceptive this time of year." She watched him cycle off, his whistle fading into the hedgerow symphony, before slicing open the seal with a letter opener shaped like a silver quill. The invitation unfolded like a petal in spring. "Lady Evelyn Harrington requests the pleasure of Miss Jane Marple's company at Gossington Hall for afternoon tea on the morrow, at 3 o'clock sharp. Attire: garden finery. Topic: matters of mutual interest." Mutual interest? Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Lady Harrington, the reclusive widow who had shuttered herself in the sprawling Elizabethan manor since her husband's untimely demise a decade ago, rarely entertained. Gossington Hall, with its ivy-cloaked towers and labyrinthine gardens, stood as a sentinel on the village's edge, a place where history clung like mist. Rumors swirled about the Harringtons, a lineage laced with fortunes won in distant colonies and lost in hushed scandals. But invitations, those were as rare as snow in July. She set the card on her lace doily table, her thoughts drifting to the last time she'd crossed paths with Lady Harrington. It had been at the village fete years back, when a misplaced brooch had sparked accusations among the stallholders. Lady Harrington, then still vibrant in widow's weeds, had dismissed the fuss with a wave of her gloved hand. Trifles, she'd said, but her eyes had betrayed a deeper unease. Miss Marple wondered what matters could summon her now. The next day dawned with a sky like polished pewter, promising rain but holding back just enough to tease. Miss Marple donned her best tweed suit, the one with the subtle herringbone pattern that blended into any gathering like a chameleon in foliage. She pinned a modest brooch, a pearl cluster from her aunt's estate, and set off down the lane, her sensible shoes tapping a steady cadence on the cobblestones. Gossington Hall loomed as she approached, its mullioned windows winking in the fitful light. The wrought-iron gates creaked open at her touch, revealing a driveway flanked by ancient oaks whose branches arched like protective arms. A butler, stiff as a starched collar, greeted her at the door. "Miss Marple, this way, if you please. Her ladyship awaits in the drawing-room." The hall's interior was a tapestry of faded grandeur. Polished oak panels etched with heraldic beasts, chandeliers dripping crystal tears, and portraits of Harrington ancestors staring down with judgmental brows. Miss Marple noted the dust motes dancing in shafts of light, a sign that the staff, though loyal, were stretched thin. In the drawing room, a fire crackled merrily in the grate, casting flickering shadows on the damask wallpaper. Lady Harrington rose from a high-backed chair, her silver hair coiled in an elegant chignon, her dress a cascade of lavender silk that whispered against the Persian rug. "Miss Marple, how delightful you could come. Do sit. The others will arrive shortly." "The others?" Miss Marple inquired, settling into a plush armchair that enveloped her like an old embrace. Lady Harrington's smile was enigmatic, a curve of lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. A small assembly, old acquaintances, you might say. Reverend Clements, Mrs. Price Ridley, and young Dr. Haydock. And, of course, my nephew, Arthur Harrington, who's visiting from London. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the names like entries in a ledger. Reverend Clements, the affable vicar with a penchant for botany. Mrs. Price Ridley, the village busybody whose tongue could slice through steel. Dr. Haydock, the pragmatic physician who favored facts over fancy. And Arthur, the prodigal nephew rumored to be eyeing his aunt's estate with more than familial affection. As the clock struck 3, the guests trickled in. Reverend Clements arrived first, his cassock dusted with pollen from his greenhouse experiments. "Lady Harrington, a pleasure as always, and Miss Marple, splendid to see you outside the church pews." Mrs. Price Ridley bustled in next, her hat a confection of feathers that bobbed like a startled bird. "Evelyn, darling, what a summons! I nearly cancelled my bridge game. But curiosity, you know, it's the spice of village life." Dr. Haydock followed, his medical bag slung over one shoulder like a faithful hound. "Afternoon, all. Hope this isn't about that rash going around. I've seen enough spots for 1 week." Arthur Harrington sauntered in last, his city polish gleaming in a tailored suit and a tie-pin that caught the firelight. "Aunt Evelyn, you look radiant. Village air agrees you. Or is it the company?" Tea was served on a silver tray laden with scones, clotted cream, and cucumber sandwiches delicate as lace. The clinking of fine china filled the room, a fragile melody underscoring the polite chatter. But beneath the surface, Miss Marple sensed undercurrents, like ripples in a pond hinting at hidden depths. It began innocently enough. Reverend Clements admired a porcelain figurine on the mantel. "Exquisite piece, Lady Harrington. Ming Dynasty, isn't it? Reminds me of the treasures your late husband brought back from his travels." Lady Harrington's teacup paused mid-air. "Yes, Reginald had an eye for the exotic, though some acquisitions came with complications." Mrs. Price Ridley leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Complications? Do tell! I recall whispers about that ruby necklace, the one said to be cursed. Didn't it vanish during the war?" Arthur cleared his throat, a sharp sound like a warning shot. "Ancient history, Mrs. Price Ridley. Let's not dredge up old mud." But the Reverend, oblivious or perhaps mischievous, pressed on. "Ah, the Harrington feud. I've heard tales in the parish records. Something about a disputed inheritance between Reginald and his brother Edmund, wasn't it? Siblings at odds over a colonial fortune." Dr. Haydock chuckled, stirring his tea. "Feuds are like bad prescriptions, best left unfilled. But villages thrive on them, eh?" Lady Harrington set her cup down with a clink that echoed like a gavel. "Enough! We're here for tea, not excavations." Miss Marple observed silently, her knitting forgotten in her lap. She noted Arthur's clenched jaw, Mrs. Price Ridley's avid gaze, the Reverend's flushed cheeks. The air thickened, laced with the scent of bergamot and unspoken grievances. Then, as if scripted by some unseen hand, a soft rustle sounded from the door. All eyes turned as a folded paper slid beneath the oak panel, inching forward like a hesitant intruder. It lay there, stark white against the rug, bearing no address, but sealed with a blob of red wax. "What on earth?" Lady Harrington murmured, her voice a thread of silk unraveling. Arthur sprang up, snatching the note. His face paled as he unfolded it, eyes scanning the scrawled words. "It's nothing. A prank, surely." But Mrs. Price Ridley, ever the opportunist, peered over his shoulder. "Let me see. Pay what's owed, or the past devours the present. Blackmail. Evelyn, who could—" The room erupted in a babble of voices. Reverend Clements invoked divine protection, Dr. Haydock demanded logic, and Lady Harrington sat frozen, her hands trembling. Miss Marple rose quietly, her presence a calming anchor. "May I?" she asked Arthur, extending a hand. He hesitated, then passed the note. The paper was cheap, the ink fresh and smudged at the edges. The words penned in a disguised hand looped erratically, but Miss Marple's eyes narrowed on the wax seal. A faint imprint of a lion rampant, the Harrington crest, though imperfect, as if pressed from a copy. "Interesting," she murmured. "Not a stranger's work. The phrasing, 'devours the present,' echoes that old poem in the village library, doesn't it? The one about family curses." Reverend Clements nodded eagerly. "Yes, from the Harrington Chronicles. But who would know that?" Miss Marple glanced at the windows, noting the garden beyond, where a figure might slip unseen. "Someone intimate with the hall. And look, the paper bears a watermark from the stationers in Much Benham. Fresh stock, I'd wager." Dr. Haydock frowned. "How does that help?" "It narrows the field," Miss Marple replied mildly. "Tommy Pierce mentioned delivering post yesterday. Perhaps he saw something." Lady Harrington's eyes widened. "The boy? But why?" "Not the boy, but perhaps someone using him for
cover. The group fell silent as Miss Marple pieced it together, her voice weaving the threads like her knitting. The note, she deduced, stemmed from a petty grudge. Arthur's recent argument with the gardener over unpaid wages, overheard by the butler's niece who worked at the stationer's. The girl, seeking leverage for her uncle, had crafted the note to stir trouble, hoping to force a settlement. A childish ploy, Miss Marple concluded, but effective in a small pond. Arthur exhaled, relief flooding his features. "Aunt, I'll handle the wages. No need for this to escalate." Lady Harrington nodded, color returning to her cheeks. "Thank you, Jane. You've a gift for seeing the knots others miss." As the guests departed, the tension eased like a storm passing. Reverend Clements patted Miss Marple's arm. A satisfying end to the afternoon. Yet, as Miss Marple glanced back at the portraits lining the hall, stern faces with eyes that seemed to follow her, a shadow lingered. One painting, of Reginald Harrington, bore a fresh smudge on the frame, as if recently touched. Why, she wondered, would dust gather everywhere but there? The sun dipped low as she walked home, the village settling into twilight hush. St. Mary Mead slumbered on, its secrets tucked away for another day, but Miss Marple knew better. Whispers, once stirred, rarely fell silent. Miss Marple's cottage, High Street's gem, was a haven of order amid the village's gentle chaos. Her garden, a riot of hollyhocks and lavender, bordered the lane where villagers passed with nods and news. That morning, before the invitation's arrival, she'd tended her roses, clipping away deadheads with pruning shears that gleamed like surgical tools. One must always prune the excess, she'd murmured to herself, a philosophy that extended far beyond botany. Tommy's delivery interrupted her reverie. The envelope's weight suggested quality stock, the kind imported from London stationers. She traced the crest, a lion and unicorn entwined, symbol of the Harringtons' noble pretensions. Inside, the invitation's wording intrigued her. Matters of mutual interest. What could link an elderly spinster to a titled widow? Miss Marple recalled Lady Harrington's husband, Sir Reginald, a man of adventure who'd sailed to India and returned with spices, silks, and stories of tiger hunts. His death, officially a hunting accident, had fueled gossip, a rival's curse, or perhaps a family betrayal.
She spent the evening poring over old newspapers in her attic, yellowed clippings from the St Mary Mead Gazette. One article caught her eye, a 1920s feud between Reginald and his brother Edmund over a diamond mine stake. Edmund had vanished, presumed lost at sea, leaving Reginald the heir. Whispers, indeed, Miss Marple said to the empty room. The next day, dressing for tea, she chose her outfit with care. The tweed was practical, but the brooch, a gift from a nephew in the colonies, added a touch of intrigue. As she walked to Gossington, she passed the vicarage, where Reverend Clements waved from his window, his face buried in a book on rare orchids. "Off to the hall?" he called. "Indeed. And you?" "Summoned as well. Curious, isn't it?" The hall's gates, ornate and rusted, swung open with a groan. The butler, Grimsby, a man with a face like weathered stone, led her through halls echoing with history. Portraits lined the walls, stern matriarchs and roughs, dashing cavaliers with swords, and Reginald himself, his mustache twisted in a perpetual smirk. The drawing-room was a sanctuary of comfort, with velvet curtains framing views of the gardens, manicured lawns rolling to a distant folly. Lady Harrington greeted her with warmth tinged with nervousness, her hands fluttering like captive birds. Conversation flowed as guests arrived. Reverend Clements discussed his latest hybrid rose, a cross between Peace and Queen Elizabeth. Symbolic, don't you think? Mrs. Price Ridley countered with tales of her bridge club's scandals. Mrs. Bantry trumped with a heart when spades were led. Deliberate, I say. Dr. Haydock shared medical anecdotes. A case of hives from eating too many strawberries reminds me of that allergy scare at the last fete. Arthur, urbane and charming, regaled with London stories, theater openings, jazz clubs, a brush with a famous actress. She said my eyes reminded her of Valentino's. Flattery, of course. Tea commenced, the tray a masterpiece. Scones warmed from the oven, jam glistening like rubies, sandwiches cut in precise triangles. But as they sipped, the conversation veered to the past. It was Mrs. Price Ridley who ignited the spark. "Evelyn, that portrait of Reginald, doesn't it capture his spirit? So adventurous. Pity about the brother, though." Lady Harrington stiffened. "Edmund? A tragic loss." Reverend Clements, sipping Earl Grey, added, "The parish records note the dispute. Over that mine in Rhodesia, wasn't it? Brothers divided by greed." Arthur's knife clattered on his plate. Uncle Edmund was a fool, gambled away his share. Dr. Haydock intervened. "Family squabbles are common as colds, but they linger if not treated." Miss Marple, nibbling a scone, observed the dynamics. Lady Harrington's averted gaze, Arthur's defensive posture, the Reverend's innocent prodding. Then the note appeared. The rustle was subtle, but in the room's hush it resounded like a thunderclap. The paper, folded thrice, bore the message in block letters. "The debt of the past must be paid, or secrets will consume the hall." Blackmail's chill settled over the group. Lady Harrington gasped, "Who dares?" Arthur snatched it, his hands shaking. "I'll burn it." But Miss Marple's quiet voice cut through. "Better to examine it first." She inspected the paper, mill-made, with a faint scent of tobacco, the kind Dr. Haydock smoked. No, subtler. The wax was from a candle in the hall, the imprint sloppy. Dialogue ensued. Suspicions flew. Mrs. Price Ridley accused the staff. Reverend Clements suggested a ghost. Dr. Haydock called for rationality. Miss Marple questioned Grimsby, who admitted seeing a village lad lurking. Tommy? No, another. Piecing it. The note's author was the gardener's daughter, resentful over Arthur's refusal to pay for damaged tools during a recent visit. She'd overheard the feud talk and crafted the note to pressure payment.
Chapter 2. Shadows in the Vicarage Garden. The morning after the unsettling tea at Gossington Hall, St Mary Mead awoke to a sky bruised with clouds, as if the village itself held its breath. Miss Jane Marple, her mind still turning over the smudged portrait frame and the cryptic blackmail note, sat at her breakfast table with a pot of Darjeeling and a plate of buttered toast. Her cottage, with its low beams and chintz curtains, was a cocoon of calm, but her thoughts wandered to the faint shadow she'd glimpsed in Lady Harrington's eyes, a shadow that hinted at secrets yet to unfurl. As she sipped her tea, the church bells tolled 9, their peal rolling across the meadows like a summons. Miss Marple set her cup down, her gaze drifting to the garden where her hollyhock stood sentinel. The note from yesterday had been resolved, a petty grudge, neatly tied up. But that smudge on the portrait frame nagged at her. Why touch a painting in a house where dust settled undisturbed? Her fingers, nimble from years of knitting, itched to unravel this new thread. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. It was Reverend Leonard Clements, his cassock slightly askew, his face flushed with something between excitement and unease. "Miss Marple, good morning. I hope I'm not intruding, but I simply must speak with you. It's about the vicarage garden. Something peculiar's afoot." Miss Marple ushered him in, noting the dirt smudged on his cuffs as if he'd been digging in haste. "Peculiar, Reverend? Do sit and tell me over a cup of tea. The kettle's still warm." He settled into a chair, his hands fidgeting with a sprig of lavender he'd plucked absent-mindedly. "It's the oddest thing, Jane. Last night, well past midnight, I heard footsteps crunching along the gravel path by the vicarage roses. I thought it was just the wind or perhaps a fox, but when I looked out, I saw a shadow, human I'm certain, darting toward the yew hedge. And this morning I found this." He produced a small brass key, tarnished but intricately etched with a floral motif from his pocket. It was half buried under the rose bushes, near where I saw the shadow. Miss Marple took the key, turning it over in her palm. Its weight suggested age, its design a craftsmanship not seen in modern locks. "Curious," she murmured. "This doesn't look like it belongs to the vicarage. Have you checked your sheds or the church?" Reverend Clements shook his head. "I've turned the place upside down. The key fits nothing I know of. But there's more. My greenhouse, where I keep my hybrid orchids, was disturbed. Soil scattered, a few pots tipped over. No theft, mind you, but it's as if someone was searching for something." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, sharp as the thorns outside her window. "Searching, you say? Let's have a look. The garden often holds more secrets than the parlor." They walked the short distance to the vicarage, a stone's throw from the church with its ancient spire piercing the clouds. The vicarage garden was a patchwork of order and whimsy. Neat rows of vegetables bordered by exuberant flower beds, where dahlias jostled with marigolds. The greenhouse, a glass jewel tucked behind a willow, hummed with the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids. Miss Marple noted the disturbed soil near the entrance, footprints too faint to discern but unmistakably fresh. "These tracks," she said, crouching with surprising agility for her years, "are shallow, as if made by someone light on their feet. A child, perhaps, or someone cautious." Reverend Clemens frowned. "A child? At midnight? Surely not my nephew, Teddy. He's only 12, and he's been abed with a cold." Miss Marple's lips twitched in a knowing smile. "Children, Reverend, are rarely where they're supposed to be, especially when adventure calls. Shall we speak with young Teddy?" They found Teddy in the vicarage parlor, a freckled boy with a mop of red hair and a guilty flush that deepened as Miss Marple's gaze met his. He was sprawled on a rug, surrounded by toy soldiers locked in a mock battle. "Teddy," the Reverend began sternly, "have you been in the garden at night?" The boy's eyes widened, darting to a corner where a tin box sat half hidden under a cushion. "No, Uncle, I swear I've been in bed." Miss Marple sat beside him, her voice soft as a lullaby. "Teddy, dear, you know I have a fondness for stories. Tell me yours. What adventure took you to the greenhouse?" Under her gentle prodding, Teddy's resolve crumbled like a biscuit in tea. "It wasn't me in the greenhouse, Miss Marple, honest. But I did sneak out last night.
I was playing detective, see? I heard about that note at Gossington Hall. Tommy Pierce told me, and I thought I'd find clues. I saw someone by the yew hedge, dropping something shiny. I grabbed it, the key, but I didn't go in the greenhouse, I swear." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. "And this someone, did you see their face?" Teddy shook his head. "Too dark. But they wore a long coat and they moved quick, like they didn't want to be seen." Reverend Clemens sighed, relief mingling with exasperation. "Teddy, you'll be the death of me. No more midnight escapades, understand?" But Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere. The key, with its floral etching, reminded her of a lockbox she'd seen years ago in the vicarage attic, part of a donation from the late Mrs. Bantry's estate. "Reverend, might we check the attic? Old keys often have old homes." The attic was a treasure trove of forgotten relics, dusty hymnals, chipped teapots, and a trunk embossed with the initials E.B. Inside, they found a lockbox, its lid etched with the same floral motif. The key fit perfectly, clicking open to reveal a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The topmost letter, yellowed but legible, was addressed to "My dearest Eliza" and signed by J.H. Reverend Clemens gasped. Eliza Bantry? And J.H.? Could that be Jonathan Harrington, Lady Harrington's father-in-law? He was vicar here before my time. Miss Marple unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the looping script. It spoke of a forbidden love thwarted by family duty and a promise to hide the truth in the garden. "Intriguing," she said, "but why disturb the greenhouse now, decades later?"
The answer came that afternoon when Miss Marple, armed with the letters, visited Mrs. Dolly Bantry at her cottage. Dolly, a robust woman with a laugh like a brass bell, welcomed her with scones and gossip. "Letters from my mother's time? Good heavens, Jane, what's this about?"
Miss Marple explained, her voice weaving a tale of star-crossed lovers and hidden promises. "I suspect someone believes these letters hold a secret worth digging for, perhaps a claim to the Harrington estate." Dolly's eyes widened. "You don't think Arthur Harrington? He's been sniffing around Gossington, asking about old deeds." Miss Marple shook her head. "Too obvious, but someone less conspicuous, perhaps. The coat Teddy saw suggests a stranger, or someone posing as one." The trail led to the village post office, where Miss Marple inquired about recent visitors. The postmistress, Miss Weatherby, a woman with a memory for faces, recalled a man in a long coat asking about the vicarage's history. Said he was a historian, but his shoes were caked in mud, odd for a scholar. Miss Marple's next stop was the churchyard, where ancient gravestones leaned like weary travelers. She found a fresh footprint near the yew hedge, matching the shallow tracks from the greenhouse. Nearby, a scrap of fabric, gray wool, torn from a coat, caught on a thorn. Her mind clicked like her knitting needles. The historian was no scholar, but a treasure hunter, drawn by rumors of the Harrington fortune. That evening, she gathered Reverend Clements, Teddy, and Dolly at the vicarage. "The key and letters," she explained, "point to a misunderstanding. The truth Jonathan wrote of was his love for Eliza, not a treasure. But someone, likely our coded stranger, overheard village talk and thought the garden hid wealth." Teddy piped up, "I saw him again, by the bridge, tossing something into the stream." Miss Marple led the group to the bridge, where, with Teddy's help, they fished out a sodden notebook. Its pages, though blurred, listed Harrington family names and dates with notes about buried assets. The handwriting matched a sample Miss Marple had seen in the post office, a guest book signed by a Mr. Ellis. Confronted at the inn, Mr. Ellis, a wiry man with nervous eyes, confessed. A distant cousin of the Harringtons,
He'd come seeking a mythical inheritance, misled by old letters he'd found in a London archive. The key, dropped in his haste, was a memento from his grandmother, Eliza's sister. "I meant no harm," he stammered. "Just wanted my due."
Chapter 3. The Poisoned Petunia. The day following the vicarage intrigue dawned with a deceptive serenity over St Mary Mead, the sun filtering through lace curtains like a tentative promise. Miss Jane Marple, ever the early riser, stood at her garden gate, her eyes tracing the faint footprint she'd noticed the night before. It was pressed into the soft earth of the lane, narrower than Mr. Ellis's clumsy treads, with a heel mark that suggested a boot of fine leather, perhaps from the city, or someone who valued discretion over durability. "Not a villager's step," she murmured to the morning dew, her mind linking it to the unresolved echoes from Gossington Hall. But before she could ponder further, the village stirred with the buzz of the annual flower show, an event that transformed the meadow into a canvas of vibrant petals and simmering rivalries. Miss Jane Marple adjusted her straw hat, adorned with a single silk daisy, and set off toward the showgrounds. The air hummed with anticipation, villagers lugging baskets of blooms, children darting like butterflies, and the distant trill of a brass band tuning up. The flower show was St Mary Mead's crown jewel, where gardeners vied for ribbons in categories from roses to rare exotics. This year, the centerpiece was the petunia competition, dominated by Mrs. Price Ridley's legendary strains, velvety purple wonders that had claimed blue ribbons for a decade. As Miss Marple arrived, the tents billowed like sails in the breeze, each housing displays of horticultural splendor. She spotted Mrs. Price Ridley fussing over her entry, a cascade of petunias in a terracotta urn, their blooms unfurling like royal cloaks. "Jane, dear, come admire my beauties. This year's hybrid, Petunia Ridley Royale, is unbeatable. I've guarded them like a dragon its hoard." Miss Marple smiled, leaning in to inhale the sweet fragrance. "Exquisite, indeed. But I hear there's stiff competition. Dr. Haydock's new variety, wasn't it? Something with a medicinal twist." Mrs. Price Ridley's eyes narrowed, her fan snapping open like a warning. "Haydock? Pah! His healing heliotrope is all hype. Claims it repels pests naturally, but I suspect chemicals. And that nephew of his, young Basil, always skulking about with his notebooks." Nearby, Dr. Haydock adjusted his display, a cluster of petunias tinged with silvery veins, engineered for resilience. He caught Miss Marple's eye and waved her over. "Miss Marple, your opinion. These beauties incorporate a trace of neem extract, nature's own pesticide. Revolutionary, if I say so." "Intriguing," Miss Marple replied, her fingers brushing a petal. "But one must be careful with extracts. They can turn foe if mishandled." The doctor chuckled, but his gaze flickered toward Mrs. Price Ridley's urn. "Quite, though some rely on sheer luck, or perhaps a dash of envy." The show commenced with the judges' procession, Colonel Melchett, stern and mustachioed, leading a panel of experts from neighboring villages. Spectators gathered, whispers rippling like wind through grass. Miss Marple positioned herself near the petunia tent, her knitting bag at her side, ears attuned to the undercurrents. It was mid-judging when the first gasp echoed. Mrs. Price Ridley's petunias, moments ago resplendent, began to droop, their petals curling inward like clenched fists. A murmur swelled as the blooms wilted before the crowd's eyes, a sickly yellow tinge spreading from stem to tip. "Sabotage!" Mrs. Price Ridley wailed, her voice piercing the band melody. "My royals poisoned!" Chaos bloomed. Colonel Melchett halted the proceedings, his monocle glinting.
"Steady on! We'll investigate. Dr. Haydock, as our resident expert, examine the plants." Dr. Haydock knelt, his brow furrowed. "Wilting from the roots up. Toxin, no doubt. Perhaps a herbicide. But who?" Suspicion arrowed toward the doctor himself. After all, his entry now stood unchallenged. Whispers accused him of jealousy, of slipping a vial into the soil during a distraction. Basil, his nephew, hovered nearby, his face pale as parchment. Miss Marple observed quietly, her eyes darting to the ground where a faint trail of droplets led from the urn to the tent's edge. "Curious," she said to no one, following the trail to a discarded glove stained with a greenish residue. She approached Colonel Melchett. "Colonel, might I assist? Gardens, like people, reveal much in their distress." He nodded gruffly. "By all means, Miss Marple, your insights are legendary." Miss Marple examined the wilted petunias, noting the uneven wilting, stronger on one side, as if the toxin had been applied selectively. Not a broad spray, targeted like a surgeon's incision. Overhearing a quarrel behind the tent, she slipped closer. Two entrants, Miss Lavinia Skinner and her sister Clara, argued in hushed tones. "You shouldn't have, Lavinia. If they find out—" "Hush, Clara. She deserved it after last year's snub." Miss Marple filed the snippet away, her mind connecting it to last year's show, where Mrs. Price Ridley had dismissed the Skinners' entry as common. Next, she conversed with Basil Haydock, who fidgeted with a sketchbook filled with botanical drawings. "Uncle didn't do it, Miss Marple. He's all about healing, not harming." "Indeed. But tell me, have you seen anyone near the displays with a vial or bottle?" Basil hesitated. "Well, I saw Miss Skinner lingering by the urn earlier. She dropped something, looked like a small glass tube." Armed with this, Miss Marple visited the Skinners' modest cottage on the village outskirts, a ramshackle affair overrun with wildflowers. Lavinia answered the door, her apron dusted with soil. "Miss Marple, what brings you?" "A matter of petals and poisons," Miss Marple said mildly. "Might I see your greenhouse? I admire your dahlias." Inside the greenhouse, amidst steaming pots and labeled jars, Miss Marple spotted a shelf of homemade remedies, including a bottle labeled "Weed Killer, Experimental." The liquid matched the greenish stain on the glove. Lavinia bristled. "That's for my thistles, nothing to do with petunias."
But Clara, wringing her hands, cracked, "It was her, Miss Marple. Lavinia's been stewing since Mrs. Price Ridley called our flowers weeds. She mixed a mild toxin, just to wilt them a bit, teach a lesson." Lavinia deflated. "I didn't mean harm, just a prank." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "Pranks, like weeds, can overrun if not uprooted." Back at the show, she presented her findings to Colonel Melchett. The glove matched Lavinia's gardening set, the toxin traced to her recipe. Lavinia confessed publicly, apologizing amid tears. Mrs. Price Ridley, though fuming, accepted with grudging grace, her reserve petunias earning a consolation prize. Harmony restored, the show continued with cheers and ribbons. Dr. Haydock's entry won fairly, Basil deeming at his side. Yet, as Miss Marple departed, she noticed a small vial, empty, labeled with a faded script, tucked behind a bench. It vanished when she turned back, a shadow flitting toward the old mill path. "Graver intentions," she whispered, the footprint from her lane echoing in her thoughts. The sun set on a village abuzz with tales, but Miss Marple knew the roots of trouble delve deeper still.
Miss Marple's gentle smile disarmed him. "The only due is truth, Mr. Ellis. The letters are a love story, not a map." The vicarage garden was restored, the letters returned to Dolly, and Teddy promised, crossed heart, to stay abed. Reverend Clements thanked Miss Marple with a cutting from his prize orchid.
You've a knack for rooting out secrets, Jane." As she walked home, the clouds parted, revealing a crescent moon. The village sighed in peace, its shadows dispelled. But Miss Marple paused by her gate, her eyes catching a faint footprint in the lane, narrower, deeper than Ellis's. Someone else had been watching, perhaps waiting. She tucked the thought away, like a stitch held for the next row, knowing St. Mary Mead's secrets were never quite done.
Chapter 4. Echoes from the Old Mill. The river's murmur had always been a lullaby to St. Mary Mead, winding through meadows like a silver thread stitching the landscape together. But on this misty morning, as fog clung to the willows like forgotten cobwebs, Miss Jane Marple found herself drawn to its banks, her thoughts tethered to the vanished vial from the flower show. That small glass tube, empty yet ominous, had disappeared amid the petunia pandemonium, its absence whispering of intentions far beyond a gardener's grudge. "Poison doesn't vanish on its own," she mused, her sturdy boots sinking into the damp earth as she approached the old mill, a relic of bygone industry now shrouded in ivy and silence. The mill stood sentinel by the water's edge, its weathered stones etched with the patina of time, the great wheel frozen mid-turn as if paused in contemplation. Abandoned since the war, it was a place villagers skirted, claiming it harbored ghosts of flower-dusted millers and wartime whispers. Miss Marple, however, saw it as a vault of untold stories, its rafters perhaps holding clues to the vial's fate. Why the mill? A faint trail of crushed grass led from the showgrounds here, and rumors had swirled of shadowy figures lurking by the river after dark. As she neared the creaking door, a boy's shout pierced the fog. Young Tommy Pierce, the postman's lad with a nose for mischief, burst from the underbrush, his arms clutching a bundle of yellowed papers. "Miss Marple, look what I've found! Up in the rafters, letters old as the hills!" "Tommy, what brings you exploring so early? And these letters, show me!" He unfolded one, the paper crackling like autumn leaves. The script was elegant, faded ink speaking of a bygone era. "My dearest Amelia, the bombs may fall on London, but my heart remains here by the mill, waiting for the day we can flee this madness together. Yours eternally, Victor." Tommy's eyes sparkled. "There's more! Talk of a secret stash, gold or jewels maybe, from the war. I bet it's treasure." Miss Marple's brow furrowed, not at the romance blooming from the page, but at the implications. Wartime elopement, Victor and Amelia, names that tugged at her memory like a loose thread. "Treasure, Tommy, let's not jump to crowns, but do keep this quiet. Rumors spread faster than river currents." Too late. By noon the village teemed with speculation. At the grocer's, Mrs. Bantry leaned over the counter, her voice a conspiratory hush. "Heard about Tommy's find. Letters hinting at hidden riches in the mill. Wartime loot, they say, smuggled from France." The grocer, Mr. Petherick, nodded sagely, polishing an apple. "Aye, and with that poison vial missing from the show, maybe someone's hunting it. Dangerous game, that." Miss Marple, picking up a tin of biscuits, overheard and interjected mildly. "Letters of love, perhaps. War bred many such tales." Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "Love? With treasure mentioned? Victor Langford, the old miller's son, ran off with Amelia Croft, the baker's daughter. Never seen again after 44. Family scandal." The names clicked, Victor and Amelia, star-crossed amid air raids, their elopement thwarted by duty or disaster. Miss Marple recalled snippets from her knitting circle, Amelia's mother weeping over a lost daughter, Victor's father cursing a runaway son. But treasure, that was new embroidery on an old tapestry. Determined to untangle the truth, Miss Marple returned to the mill, Tommy in tow for safety. The interior was a cavern of shadows, dust motes dancing in slivers of light piercing the boarded windows. The air smelled of damp wood and forgotten grain, the floorboards groaning underfoot like reluctant confessors. "Up there!" Tommy pointed to a ladder leading to the rafters, where beams crisscrossed like a giant's game of pick-up sticks. Miss Marple, ever practical, handed him a torch from her bag. "Shine it steady, lad." Climbing with care, she retrieved a small tin box wedged between joists, its lid rusted but intact. Inside, more letters, a pressed flower, a forget-me-not, and a locket with faded photographs, a young man in uniform, a woman with laughing eyes. One letter stood out, dated 1944. "Amelia, the cash is safe under the wheel. Not gold, but our future. Papers for a new life across the channel. Meet me at midnight. If I don't come, know my love endures." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "Not treasure, Tommy. Documents, perhaps forged passports, escape plans, dangerous in wartime." Tommy's disappointment was palpable. "No gold, but why hide them?" "Love defies borders," she replied, pocketing the box. But as they descended, a noise echoed from below, a scuffle, then silence. The door, ajar when they entered, now bore a shiny new padlock, its chain gleaming mockingly. "Someone's been here," Miss Marple whispered, her eyes narrowing. Outside, the fog had lifted, revealing the river's lazy flow. Tommy spotted a figure retreating along the bank, a tall man in a tweed cap, limping slightly. "That's old Mr. Finch, the war veteran, lives in the cottage yonder." Mr. Finch, a reclusive soul with a medal collection and a grudge against the world, rarely ventured out. Miss Marple recalled his tales of lost comrades, his bitterness over a betrayed mission. Could he be linked? They trailed him discreetly to his cottage, a squat building overrun with nettles. Peering through a window, Miss Marple saw him poring over a map, muttering, "The cash! Must destroy it before they find." Confrontation was inevitable. Knocking firmly, Miss Marple announced, "Mr. Finch, a word about the mill." He opened the door, his face a mask of surprise turning to wariness. "Miss Marple, and the boy, what business at the mill?" "The letters," she said plainly, producing one, "Victor's and Amelia's. You knew them." Finch's shoulders sagged, inviting them in. His parlor was a museum of memorabilia, faded uniforms, dog tags, a wireless set gathering dust. "Knew them? Victor was my best mate. We served together, Signals Corps. Amelia was his sweetheart. They planned to elope, using forged papers I helped procure. Risky business, if caught, treason." Tommy leaned forward, enthralled. "What happened?" Finch's voice cracked. "Night of the rendezvous, Luftwaffe raid, Victor caught in the blast, gone. I hid the papers under the wheel, as per his wish. Amelia, heartbroken, married another, moved away. But lately, whispers of treasure, fools thinking it's gold. I locked the mill to protect the secret." Miss Marple nodded. "And the vial?
From the flower show? Finch frowned. Vile, nothing to do with me, but I've seen prowlers, city types, asking about wartime relics, perhaps relic hunters. A new thread. Outsiders drawn by rumors. Miss Marple probed gently. Amelia, where is she now? Finch's eyes softened. Alive, in Devon, widow now, writes occasionally, never forgot Victor. Inspiration struck. Then let's reunite them with the truth. The plan unfolded over tea in Finch's parlor, the kettle whistling like a train to the past. Tommy fetched stationery, and Miss Marple drafted a letter to Amelia, enclosing a copy of Victor's final missive. Time heals, but truth mends. Days passed in a flurry. Rumors quelled as Miss Marple shared select truths at the Women's Institute, framing it as a poignant romance, not riches. The village sighed collectively, enchanted by the tale. Then Amelia arrived, frail but elegant, her silver hair pinned with the forget-me-nots twin. At the mill, unlocked by Finch, they
Gathered Amelia, Finch, Tommy, and Miss Marple. Under the wheel, in a waterproof tin, the papers emerged. Yellowed passports, a marriage license, never used. Amelia's tears fell like rain. He waited all these years. Finch clasped her hand. He loved you till the end. The reunion was tender, two souls bridging decades. Tommy, wide-eyed, promised to guard the story. As Amelia departed, clutching the locket, peace settled over the mill. Yet as Miss Marple bid farewell, she noticed the new lock. Replaced, but with a key left in it. No, not left, placed deliberately. And nearby, a discarded cigarette butt, foreign brand, not local. Darker secrets, she murmured, the river's echo carrying a warning. The sun dipped, casting long shadows, but St Mary Mead's heart beat on, its pulses of mystery unending.
Chapter 5. The Midnight Caller. The night was a velvet curtain over St Mary Mead, stars winking like conspirators through the lattice of bare branches. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a shawl against the October chill, sat by her hearth, her knitting needles idle as her mind wove through the threads of recent mysteries. The blackmail note at Gossington Hall, the vicarage key, the poisoned petunias, and the wartime letters at the old mill. Each had been neatly resolved, yet the cigarette butt by the mill, foreign, acrid, and out of place, lingered in her thoughts like an uninvited guest. It was a clue to a larger pattern, one that whispered of outsiders stirring the village's quiet waters. As the clock struck 11, its chimes soft as a sigh, a frantic knock shattered the stillness, rattling the cottage door like a heartbeat out of rhythm. Miss Marple rose, her slippers whispering across the polished floorboards. Peering through the lace curtain, she glimpsed a figure in the moonlight. Mrs. Dolly Bantry, her neighbor and confidant, her coat thrown hastily over a nightdress, her hair in disarray. "Jane!" Dolly's voice was a strained whisper. "Let me in, quickly!" Ushering her friend inside, Miss Marple noted the wildness in Dolly's eyes, the tremble in her hands clutching a crumpled handkerchief. "Dolly, dear, what's happened? You look as if you've seen a ghost." "Worse than a ghost," Dolly gasped, sinking into an armchair. "Someone broke into the lodge. The study's a wreck. Papers scattered, drawers upended. I saw them, Jane, a figure in a cloak, fleeing across the lawn just after midnight. I couldn't sleep after the mill gossip, so I was at the window. Oh, it's dreadful." Miss Marple poured tea from a thermos, the steam curling like a question mark. "Start from the beginning, Dolly. What did you see, exactly?"
Dolly's words tumbled out. "I was restless, thinking of those letters Tommy found. I stood by the study window, looking out, when I heard a creak, like the side door forced open. Then a shadow moved inside, quick and silent. I grabbed Arthur's old cricket bat, but before I could act, they were gone, out the French doors, across the lawn toward the orchard. I found this caught on the latch." She produced a torn glove, gray kid leather, its stitching frayed but fine, suggesting wealth or pretense. Miss Marple examined the glove, her fingers tracing the delicate seams. "Not a villager's glove," she murmured, "too refined for daily wear." "And the study, what was taken?" Dolly said, wringing her handkerchief. "Nothing, as far as I can tell, but the papers, old letters, estate records, even my diary, were strewn about. They were searching, Jane, for something specific." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, sharp as the firelight. The mill letters mentioned a cache, documents, not gold. Perhaps someone believes the Bantry estate holds similar secrets. Let's see the damage. They ventured to Bantry Lodge, a rambling manor cloaked in ivy, its gables looming like watchful sentinels. The study, a haven of leather-bound books and polished oak, was indeed in chaos. Drawers gaped, a rug skewed, and a brass paperweight lay toppled like a fallen king. Miss Marple knelt, her gaze catching a faint smudge on the desk, a fingerprint in ink, as if someone had rifled through a ledger and left their mark. "Dolly," she asked, "any recent visitors? Someone asking about family history?" Dolly frowned, thinking, "Well, there was that journalist last week, Miss Clara Vane, from some London paper, said she was writing about wartime estates, asked odd questions about my grandfather's shipping ventures. I thought her charming, but pushy." Miss Marple filed the name away, recalling a woman in a smart hat at the flower show, scribbling in a notebook. And the glove, did it match her attire? Dolly's eyes widened. It might. She wore gloves, gray, stylish. But a thief? She seemed so professional. "Professionals," Miss Marple said softly, "can wear many masks." Dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of rose and amber. Miss Marple, after soothing Dolly with promises of answers, visited the village inn where Miss Clara Vane had taken a room. The innkeeper, Mrs. Murgatroyd, a woman with a memory for guests, confirmed Clara's presence. "Left early this morning, she did. Said she had a train to catch. Left this behind, though." She handed over a fountain pen, engraved with C.V. Miss Marple turned the pen, noting its weight. Expensive, like the glove. "Did she meet anyone here?" Mrs. Murgatroyd nodded. "A man, rough sort, in a tweed cap. They talked in whispers by the fire. Heard him mention the lodge and papers."
The tweed cap pricked Miss Marple's memory. Mr. Finch's limping figure at the mill. But Finch was a recluse, not a thief. A partner, perhaps? She thanked Mrs. Murgatroyd and headed to the post office, where telegrams could trace Clara Vane's trail. Miss Weatherby, the postmistress, was sorting letters with a hawk's precision. Clara Vane sent a wire yesterday to a Mr. Reginald Thorne in London. Urgent, she said, about documents found. Miss Marple's mind spun. Reginald, echoes of the Harrington name from Gossington. A coincidence? She doubted it. Returning to her cottage, she penned a discreet note to a London acquaintance, a retired clerk with access to newspaper archives, requesting a check on Clara Vane and Reginald Thorne. While awaiting a reply, she enlisted Tommy Pierce, ever eager for adventure, to scout the orchard where the cloaked figure had fled. "Look for anything out of place, Tommy. Threads,
footprints, anything dropped in haste. Tommy returned by noon, breathless, clutching a crumpled receipt from a London tobacconist, dated 3 days prior. "Found it by the apple trees, Miss Marple. Smells like that cigarette you mentioned from the mill." The receipt listed a purchase of Gauloise, French, matching the mill's cigarette butt. A pattern emerged. An outsider, possibly Clara, linked to the mill and now the lodge, chasing wartime secrets. But why the Bantry estate? That afternoon, Miss Marple invited Dolly and Reverend Clements to tea, seeking their memories of wartime St Mary Mead. The vicar, sipping chamomile, recalled, "Your grandfather, Dolly, Captain Bantry, ran a supply line during the war. Rumour was he smuggled more than rations, documents, perhaps, for resistance fighters." Dolly gasped. "Grandfather? He never spoke of it. But he kept a locked box in the study, said it was private." Miss Marple's eyes lit up. "Might we see it?" The box, hidden in a false drawer, yielded under Dolly's key. Inside, a ledger listing shipments, grain, wool, and, cryptically, sensitive cargo to Dover, 1943. A note in Captain Bantry's hand read, "For Victor L., safe passage secured." Victor Langford, the mill's lost lover. Miss Marple connected the dots. Clara Vane, perhaps a descendant or hired sleuth, sought these records, believing they held value, financial or historical. The glove, the pen, the receipt all pointed to her. The London clerk's telegram arrived that evening. Clara Vane, freelance journalist, known for exposés. Linked to Reginald Thorne, antiquarian with interest in wartime artifacts, last seen at King's Cross. Miss Marple, with Dolly's permission, set a trap. She spread word via the grocer's gossip that the Bantry ledger would be moved to the church safe for security. That night, she and Reverend Clements hid in the vestry, the ledger a decoy on the altar. At midnight, a figure slipped in, Clara Vane, her cloak discarded, revealing a sleek suit. She froze as Miss Marple stepped forward, candle in hand. "Miss Vane, the ledger's secrets are safe, but yours are not." Clara's defiance crumbled under Miss Marple's steady gaze. "I meant no harm. Thorne hired me, said the Bantry papers could prove a wartime scandal, fetch a fortune from collectors. I only wanted a story." "And the break-in?" Miss Marple pressed. "A mistake," Clara admitted. "I panicked, thought the papers were in the study. I dropped the glove escaping." The Reverend, stern but kind, offered, "Confess to Colonel Melchett, and we'll settle this quietly." Clara agreed, penitent. The ledger was returned, the study restored. Dolly, relieved, hosted a small gathering to thank Miss Marple, where laughter replaced fear. Yet, as Miss Marple walked home, the moon casting shadows like spilled ink, she paused. A scrap of paper, caught in her hedge, bore a single word, inheritance. Not Clara's hand, too precise, masculine. The cigarette, the footprint, now this. Someone else was watching, their motives tied to legacies deeper than wartime romance. St Mary Mead slept, but its secrets stirred, waiting for dawn.
Chapter 6. Veils of Deception. The autumn dusk draped St Mary Mead in a hush of amber and shadow, the village lanes glowing with the last embers of daylight. Miss Jane Marple, her mind a tapestry of clues woven from recent days, the blackmail note, the vicarage key, the poisoned petunias, the mill letters, and the midnight break-in, sat by her window, her knitting a soft metronome to her thoughts. The scrap of paper found in her hedge, bearing the single word inheritance, in a precise masculine hand, was a new thread in the village's unraveling mystery. It hinted at motives deeper than theft or wartime romance, pointing to legacies buried in St. Mary Mead's quiet heart. As the church clock chimed 6, a new summons arrived. A note from Miss Hartnell, the village seamstress, slipped under her door, requesting urgent aid at her shop. A matter of trust, it read, and tangled threads. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles, noting the note's trembling script, as if penned in haste or fear. Miss Hartnell, a wiry woman with a needle-sharp wit and a shop stuffed with bolts of calico and silk, was not prone to dramatics. Her summons suggested trouble beyond a torn hem. Donning her tweed coat and a scarf embroidered with violets, Miss Marple stepped into the evening, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and distant bonfires. The seamstress's shop, tucked between the bakery and the cobbler's, was a jewel box of fabrics, its windows aglow with lamplight. Inside, Miss Hartnell stood amidst a chaos of spools and scissors, her face pale as the muslin draped over a mannequin. "Jane, thank heaven you're here," she said, her voice a thread stretched taut. "A disaster, a will, forged, I'm certain, has turned the Carstairs family upside down, and I'm caught in the middle." Miss Marple settled onto a stool, her eyes scanning the cluttered work table. Swatches of velvet, a pincushion bristling like a hedgehog, and a crumpled document bearing the Carstairs crest. "Tell me everything, Emily. Start with the will." Miss Hartnell wrung her hands, her apron spotted with thread snips. "It's the Carstairs siblings, Lillian and George. Their father, old Mr. Carstairs, died last month, leaving the estate to be split equally. But yesterday, at a family gathering here, Lillian was having a dress fitted. This new will appeared, claiming George gets everything. Lillian's distraught, says it's not her father's hand, and they think I had a hand in it, because it was found in my shop." Miss Marple's brow furrowed, her fingers brushing the document. The paper was crisp, the ink too fresh for a month-old will, and the signature, a florid J. Carstairs, wavered as if traced with uncertainty. "Curious," she murmured. "Where exactly was it found?" "In the fitting room, tucked inside a bolt of serge. I swear, Jane, I've never seen it before. But George, he's been acting strange, hovering here, asking about Father's papers. And Lillian thinks I'm in league with him." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the shop's back door, slightly ajar, leading to a narrow alley. "Anyone else present at this gathering?" Miss Hartnell nodded. "Just the siblings and their cousin, Violet Carstairs, who's visiting from Bristol. She's quiet, but watchful. Oh, and young Tommy Pierce, delivering thread. He's always poking about." The mention of Tommy pricked Miss Marple's memory, the boy's knack for stumbling into secrets. She filed it away, focusing on the will. "Let's speak with the Carstairs. A family quarrel can unravel quickly if not stitched up." The Carstairs home, a Georgian manor on the village's edge, hummed with tension as Miss Marple arrived with Miss Hartnell. Lillian Carstairs, a statuesque woman with eyes red from crying, greeted them in the parlor, where a fire crackled fitfully. George, her brother, lounged by the mantel, his suit impeccable, but his smile strained. Violet, the cousin, sat in a corner, her needlepoint a shield against the room's discord.
Lillian clutched a handkerchief. "Miss Marple, this will is a lie. Father promised us equal shares, our home, the land, everything. George claims he found it, but look at the writing. It's not Father's." George's jaw tightened. "It's legal, Lillian, signed and witnessed. Why would I forge it? I don't need the estate. I've my own investments." Violet glanced up, her voice soft but pointed. "Yet you've been asking about Father's old letters, George, the ones he kept locked away." Miss Marple noted the flicker in George's eyes, like a candle caught in a draught. "Letters? Perhaps they'd clarify things. May I see them?" Lillian led them to a study, its shelves lined with leather-bound volumes and a locked cabinet. Inside, under a false panel, lay a bundle of letters, old, yellowed, but unrelated to the will. They spoke of Mr. Carstairs' youth, his travels to India, and a cryptic reference to a debt repaid in kind. No mention of inheritance, but the word debt echoed the note in Miss Marple's hedge. Back in the parlor, Miss Marple questioned Violet. "You've been observing, Miss Carstairs. Any strangers about recently?" Violet hesitated, her needle pausing. "A man came last week, said he was a solicitor, Mr. Baxter, asked about Father's estate, claiming to verify documents. He had a sharp face like a fox." Miss Marple's mind spun. A solicitor, or another relic hunter like Clara Vane. She thanked the family and returned to the shop, where Tommy Pierce was loitering, his cap askew. "Tommy," she said gently, "did you see anything odd during the Carstairs fitting?" Tommy shuffled his feet. "Well, I saw George slip something into the serge bolt. Thought it was just a note for Miss Hartnell, but it looked like that will paper."
Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "And this Mr. Baxter, did you see him?" Tommy nodded. "By the alley, talking to George. Gave him a packet. Papers, maybe." The puzzle took shape. George, desperate for control, perhaps coached by Baxter, a figure tied to the inheritance note. Miss Marple visited the post office, where Miss Weatherby confirmed a telegram from Baxter to a London address requesting Carstairs file confirmation. That evening, Miss Marple gathered the Carstairs siblings, Violet and Miss Hartnell, at the manor. She produced the forged will, pointing to the ink, a modern brand, not the fountain pen ink of old Mr. Carstairs' time. "George," she said, her voice calm but firm, "this will is a fabrication. Tommy saw you plant it, and your meeting with Baxter suggests a scheme." George's bravado crumbled. "It wasn't for greed. I owe debts. Gambling. Baxter promised to clear them if I secured the estate. He provided the will, said it was foolproof." Lillian gasped. "You'd ruin us for debts?" Violet intervened, her voice steady. "He's family, Lillian. Let's settle this privately." Miss Marple nodded. "Confess to Colonel Melchett, George. He'll ensure fairness. The estate remains split, as your father intended." George agreed, penitent, and the siblings embraced, their rift mending like a torn seam. As Miss Marple left, the manor's clock struck 9, its chime a reminder of time's healing touch. But on the path home, she paused, spotting a thimble glinting in the grass, engraved with A.C., not a Carstairs initial. Amelia Croft, perhaps, from the mill letters, or another vanished villager. The inheritance note, the cigarette, the footprint, all pointed to a shadow still at large. St. Mary Mead's lanterns glowed, but its secrets whispered on, stitching a new pattern for dawn.
Chapter 7. The Fatal Fête. The annual St. Mary Mead Fête was a tapestry of joy woven into the village's summer rhythm, its meadow transformed into a kaleidoscope of bunting, laughter, and the scent of fresh-baked pies. But beneath the July sun, Miss Jane Marple sensed a chill.
Her thoughts snagged on the thimble engraved AC, a relic from the Carstairs drama, possibly tied to Amelia Croft of the Mill Letters, or another shadow yet unnamed. The inheritance note, the foreign cigarette, the elusive footprint, all hinted at a thread running deeper than the village's surface gaiety. As stalls rose like colorful mushrooms and children darted with painted faces, Miss Jane Marple, in her lavender frock and a hat adorned with a single rose, strolled the grounds, her eyes sharp as the pins in her sewing kit. The fete buzzed with life. A brass band blared a jaunty tune. The vicar's tombola spun with promises of prizes, and Mrs. Price Ridley presided over the cake stall, her voice carrying like a sergeant's. But the heart of the event was the refreshment tent, where scones and lemonade flowed, and Colonel Lucius Prothero, a retired military man with a mustache like a steel brush, held court. His booming laugh masked a reputation for ruthlessness, his wealth from colonial ventures a source of both awe and envy. Miss Marple paused by the flower stall, where Miss Hartnell displayed her dahlias. "A fine day, Emily," she said, noting the seamstress's nervous glance toward the colonel. "Is all well?" Miss Hartnell fidgeted with a ribbon. "Well enough, Jane, but the colonel's been overbearing. Demanded I alter his wife's gown by tomorrow, no charge. Said it's for a gala in London." Miss Marple's lips twitched. Prothero's demands were legendary, as were his feuds, with farmers over land, with the vicar over sermons, and with a former maid, Elsie Tanner, dismissed under murky circumstances. "He casts a long shadow," she murmured, her gaze drifting to the refreshment tent. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of butter and jam. Colonel Prothero, red-faced and jovial, sampled a scone from a tray offered by young Nancy Druitt, a baker's apprentice, with a shy smile. "Finest scone yet, girl," he bellowed. Crumbs dusted his waistcoat. "You'll make some man a fortune." Nancy blushed, retreating to the serving table. Miss Marple, accepting a cup of tea from Mrs. Bantry, noted the colonel's entourage, his wife, Margaret, pale and withdrawn, Dr. Haydock offering medical quips, and Arthur Harrington, the Gossington nephew, his city polish gleaming amid the rustic crowd. The fete hummed along until a piercing scream shattered the merriment. Nancy stumbled from the tent, her apron stained with tea. "The colonel! He's collapsed! Oh, it's awful!" Miss Marple hurried forward, the crowd parting like a curtain. Colonel Prothero lay sprawled on the grass, his face contorted, a half-eaten scone clutched in his hand. Dr. Haydock knelt beside him, his fingers seeking a pulse. "He's gone," he said grimly. "Poison, I'd wager. Cyanide by the smell." Chaos erupted. Mrs. Prothero fainted, her silk shawl pooling like spilled wine. Villagers gasped, children were hustled away, and Colonel Melchett, the fete's judge, barked for order. "Nobody leaves. We've a murder on our hands." Miss Marple, calm as a still pond, surveyed the scene. The scone, crumbled in the colonel's grip, bore a faint greenish tinge, reminiscent of the petunia poison, but sharper, more lethal. She recalled the missing vial from the flower show. Could it have resurfaced here? Her eyes scanned the tent, the serving tray, now empty, Nancy's trembling hands, and Arthur Harrington, the sudden absence. "Dr. Haydock," she called softly, "might I examine the scone?" He nodded, passing her a fragment wrapped in a napkin. The scent was acrid, unmistakable. "Cyanide, as you said, Miss Marple," confirmed, "but how did it reach only him?" Colonel Melchett, his monocle glinting, joined them. "Miss Marple, your knack for these things is uncanny. Any thoughts?" She pointed to the tray's position, isolated from other food. The poison was in that scone alone, targeted. Who served it? All eyes turned to Nancy, who sobbed. "I didn't, I swear. I just handed out what was baked." Mrs. Bantry, rallying, vouched for her. "Nancy's been with me all morning. Those scones came from the bakery, Mr. Croft's batch." Miss Marple's mind raced. Croft, the baker, had no love for Prothero, who'd once accused him of short-changing flour rations. But a more likely suspect emerged, Elsie Canner, the dismissed maid, now working at the bakery. Miss Marple recalled her whispers of bitterness. Prothero had sacked her for insolence after she rejected his advances. She slipped away to the bakery, a stone cottage fragrant with yeast and sugar. Mr. Croft, kneading dough, frowned at her arrival. "Miss Marple? Fet's that way." "I'm here about Elsie," she said gently. "She helped with the scones, didn't she?" Croft's hands stilled. "Aye, she did. But she's no killer. Prothero had it coming, always bullying that one."
Miss Marple noted a jar on the shelf, labeled Pest Control, Keep Away. Its lid was loose, a faint green residue inside. "This jar, Mr. Croft, has Elsie handled it?" He paled. She tidies the storeroom, but surely not." At the fete, Miss Marple sought Elsie, finding her by the coconut shy, her eyes red but defiant. "Elsie," she began, her voice soft as a breeze, "the Colonel wronged you. Did you act on it?" Elsie's lip trembled. "He ruined me, spread lies, cost me my place. I saw the vial at the flower show, thought it was weed killer, mixed a bit into his scone, meant to sicken him. Not this." Miss Marple's heart sank, but her resolve held. "You must tell Colonel Melchett. Truth may lighten the burden." Elsie nodded, tears falling. Miss Marple escorted her to Melchett, who listened gravely. "Manslaughter, perhaps. We'll sort it legally." The fete resumed, subdued but resolute, as Elsie was taken for questioning. Mrs. Prothero, revived, thanked Miss Marple quietly. "He wasn't a kind man, but you've given us closure." As the sun dipped, Miss Marple lingered by the tent, her eyes catching a glint in the grass. A cigarette case, silver, engraved with R.T., not Elsie's nor Croft's. Reginald Thorne, the antiquarian from the lodge break-in. The case smelled of Gauloise, tying it to the mill and hedge note, and nearby a scrap of paper with "Copycat" scrawled in the same precise hand as "Inheritance." Miss Marple tucked the case into her bag, the village's lights twinkling like stars fallen to earth. The fate's joy was restored, but a shadow loomed, its intentions darker than a poisoned scone.
Chapter 8. Unraveled Threads. The twilight over St. Mary Mead was a delicate veil, softening the edges of cottages and casting long shadows across the cobbled lanes. Miss Jane Marple, her mind a-loom weaving the village's recent mysteries, the blackmail note at Gossington Hall, the vicarage key, the poisoned petunias, the mill letters, the midnight break-in, the forged will, and the fatal scone at the fete, sat in her parlor, the glow of a single lamp illuminating her knitting. The silver cigarette case, engraved R.T., found amid the fate's chaos, lay on her table, its Gauloise scent a sharp reminder of the elusive mastermind behind the inheritance and copycat notes. The precise script, the foreign cigarette, the unfamiliar footprint, all pointed to a schemer orchestrating discord, their motives tangled in the village's past. As the clock ticked toward 9, a new clue beckoned, a whispered rumor from the Women's Institute about strange lights flickering in the churchyard where ancient yews guarded secrets older than the stones. Miss Marple donned her woolen shawl, its heather hue blending with the dusk, and slipped out, her steps light but purposeful. The churchyard, a mosaic of weathered graves and mossy paths, was silent
save for the rustle of leaves. Yet as she approached the yew grove, a faint glow pulsed, lantern light, darting like a will-o'-wisp. She crouched behind a headstone, her heart steady, her eyes sharp as the needle in her pocket. Two figures emerged, cloaked in dark coats, their voices low but distinct. "The ledger's here, I'm sure," hissed one, a man with a clipped accent, city, not local. The second, a woman, replied, "We need those names, every smuggler listed, Thorns paying a fortune." Miss Marple's breath caught. Smuggling! The ledger mentioned. Could it tie to Colonel Prothero's wartime ventures or Captain Bantry's coded shipments? And Thorn, Reginald Thorn, the antiquarian linked to the cigarette case and the lodge break-in. Her fingers tightened on the thimble marked AC, a relic still unplaced, possibly Amelia Croft's, but now a key to a larger web. The figures vanished into the shadows, their lantern extinguished. Miss Marple crept forward, noting a disturbed patch of earth near a grave inscribed Elijah Stokes, 1880, 1943. Stokes, a name from village lore, a merchant with ties to wartime black markets, smuggling, some said, though never proven. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Might there be records? Parish ledgers, perhaps? In the vestry, amid dusty tomes, they found a ledger from 1943, its pages listing tithes and burials. Tucked inside was a folded sheet, yellowed but intact, detailing unofficial shipments through St Mary Mead, cigarettes, silk, even coded messages, orchestrated by Stokes and a network including Prothero and Captain Bantry. Names jumped out: Langford, Victor's father; Harrington, Reginald's kin; and an A. Croft, Amelia, the mill's lost lover. "This," Miss Marple said, "is what they seek, a syndicate's secrets worth killing for." The vicar paled. "But why now, after all these years?" "Greed doesn't age," she replied, "and Prothero's death, perhaps he knew too much." Miss Marple's next stop was the village hall, where Mrs. Bantry was organizing fate cleanup. "Dolly, your grandfather's shipping. Did he ever mention Stokes or a syndicate?"
Dolly's brow furrowed. "Vaguely. He spoke of necessary risks during the war, goods moved under the table to fund resistance. But he burned most records, said they were dangerous." The puzzle grew. A wartime smuggling ring, its ledgers hidden, now hunted by outsiders like Thorn. The cigarette case, the notes, the churchyard lights, all pointed to a concerted effort to unearth the past for profit. Miss Marple enlisted Colonel Melchett, whose military precision suited the task. "Colonel, we've a conspiracy afoot. I propose a watch tonight, at the churchyard." Melchett, his monocle glinting, agreed. "If they're after Stokes's secrets, we'll catch them red-handed." That evening, Miss Marple, Melchett, and Tommy hid among the yews, the moon a sliver casting jagged shadows. At midnight, the figures returned, the man and woman from the night before, now joined by a third, limping, in a tweed cap. Mr. Finch, the Mills veteran? No, the limp was different, theatrical. The trio dug, their shovels biting the earth. Miss Marple whispered to Melchett, "Wait until they uncover it." A tin box emerged, rusted but sealed. As the man pried it open, Melchett sprang forward, his voice a bark. "Halt! You're under arrest!" The figures froze, then bolted, but Tommy, nimble as a fox, tripped the woman. She fell, revealing Clara Vane, the journalist from the lodge break-in. The man, unmasked, was Reginald Thorn himself, his sharp face twisted in fury. The limping figure, a hired thug named Baxter, surrendered under Melchett's glare. Clara's defiance crumbled.
We wanted the ledger, proof of the syndicate. Collectors pay millions for wartime relics. Prothero was part of it. His death was a warning to others. Miss Marple stepped forward, the ledger in hand. You copied Elsie's poison trick, didn't you? The vial, the scone, a distraction to keep the village rattled. Thorne sneered. Clever, old woman, but you've had no proof. She held up the cigarette case. Yours, Mr. Thorne, and your notes, inheritance, copycat, in your hand. The police will find more. Baxter cracked, confessing to digging, to planting notes to sow fear. Clara admitted orchestrating the break-in, seeking any trace of the syndicate. The ledger, they believed, named living descendants with claims to hidden assets. Melchett took them into custody, the tin box revealing only a list of shipments, no gold, just history. Miss Marple shared the truth with the village at the Women's Institute, framing it as a cautionary tale of greed. The syndicate's survivors, Amelia Croft among them, were left in peace, their secrets safe. As dawn painted the churchyard gold, Miss Marple paused by Stokes' grave, the thimble in her pocket. A.C., Amelia Croft, a smuggler's daughter, her legacy tied to the ring. But a final clue lingered, a shadow by the lich gate, too swift to catch, leaving a faint scent of Gauloise. The mastermind, perhaps, had slipped away. St. Mary Mead exhaled, its harmony restored, but Miss Marple knew one thread remained loose, waiting to be tugged.
Chapter 9. The Reckoning at Rose Cottage. The late August light bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, softening the edges of its thatched roofs and cobblestone paths, yet Miss Jane Marple felt a prickle of unease as she sipped her morning tea. Her parlor, with its chintz curtains and ticking clock, was a haven of order, but her mind churned with the village's recent tapestry of secrets, the blackmail note at Gossington Hall, the vicarage key, the poisoned petunias, the mill letters, the midnight break-in, the forged will, the fatal fete scone, and the wartime smuggling syndicate. The Gauloise-scented shadow at the churchyard lich gate, glimpsed after the syndicate's unmasking, was a loose thread, its precise hand behind the inheritance and copycat notes, pointing to a mastermind still at large. The thimble marked A.C., likely Amelia Croft's, sat in her pocket, a weighty clue to a past betrayal. As the sun climbed, a new summons arrived, a tremulous knock, followed by a note from Miss Lavinia Pinkerton, the reclusive spinster of Rose Cottage, pleading for aid. "A matter of grave consequence," it read, "and shadows long buried." Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, its soft wool a shield against the morning's chill, and set out for Rose Cottage, a quaint dwelling nestled beyond the village green, its walls smothered in climbing roses. Miss Pinkerton, a woman of 60 with eyes like faded cornflowers, rarely ventured out, her days spent tending her garden and scribbling in leather-bound journals. The note's urgency suggested a crack in her quiet existence, and Miss Marple's instincts hummed with anticipation. The cottage door creaked open, revealing Miss Pinkerton in a faded dress, her hands clutching a worn diary. "Jane, thank heaven," she whispered, her voice brittle as autumn leaves. "I've found something terrible. Diaries from my youth hidden in the attic that speak of a betrayal tied to the Harringtons. And now someone's been watching the cottage. Footprints in my garden, a face at the window last night." Miss Marple's gaze sharpened, noting the muddy prints on the doorstep, narrow and deep, matching the elusive footprint from her lane. "Show me the diaries, Lavinia, and tell me of this betrayal." They sat in the parlor, a cozy space cluttered with doilies and porcelain cats, the air scented with lavender and old paper. Miss Pinkerton opened the diary, its pages yellowed but legible, dated 1943. The entry described a clandestine meeting at Rose Cottage. Lavinia, then a young woman, had overheard her father, a Harrington estate manager, conspiring with Elijah Stokes and Colonel Prothero to smuggle wartime goods, silk, tobacco, even forged documents, through St. Mary Mead. A name stood out: Amelia Croft, the mill's lost lover, who had unwittingly carried messages, believing them love notes from Victor Langford. The diary hinted at a deeper sin. Lavinia's father had betrayed Amelia, revealing her role to the authorities to protect the syndicate, leading her to the fleet from the village. Miss Marple's heart sank. Amelia was scapegoated then, and these footprints, someone seeks to silence this truth? Lavinia nodded, her hands trembling. Last night I saw a man, tall, in a dark coat, peering through the roses, and this was left on my doorstep. She produced a folded note, its script matching the inheritance note. Keep silent, or the past will bury you. Miss Marple examined the note, its paper crisp, scented faintly of Gauloise. This is no coincidence. The syndicate's secrets are resurfacing, and someone fears exposure. Determined to trace the watcher, Miss Marple enlisted Tommy Pierce, whose sharp eyes had served her well. Tommy, scout the cottage garden for clues, anything out of place. Tommy returned by noon, clutching a brass button, etched with a hawk motif, found beneath a rosebush. "It's not local, Miss Marple. Looks fancy, like from a city tailor." The button sparked a memory. A man at the fete, in a tailored coat, hovering near Prothero before the fatal scone. Could he be the mastermind? Miss Marple visited the village tailor, Mr. Pym, whose shop smelled of starch and wool. "Mr. Pym, have you seen such a button?" Pym peered through his pince-nez. "Not mine, but I'd wager it's from Savile Row. Saw a gentleman at the inn last week, Mr. Langley, called himself. Wore a coat with buttons like that, dark green, very posh." At the inn, Mrs. Murgatroyd confirmed Langley's stay. "Left yesterday, but he met a woman, Clara Vane, the journalist. They argued about documents and Harringtons. He limped, too, like he was hiding it." Clara Vane again, and a limping man, not Finch, but perhaps the churchyard's third figure. Miss Marple's mind wove the threads. Langley, possibly an alias for Reginald Thorne or his agent, hunting the syndicate's secrets, using Clara as a pawn. The diary's revelation tied Amelia Croft to the Harringtons, suggesting a motive, perhaps a claim to their estate. Miss Marple called on Mrs. Bantry, whose grandfather's smuggling tied to the syndicate. Over tea in the lodge's sunny conservatory, Dolly frowned. "Amelia Croft? My mother mentioned her. A kind soul betrayed by the village. She fled to Devon, but her family had a stake in the Harrington land never claimed." The puzzle grew. A betrayal that cost Amelia her home, now resurfacing as a motive for murder and threats. Miss Marple returned to Rose Cottage, where Lavinia showed her a hidden compartment in the parlor hearth containing a photograph, Lavinia's father, Stokes, Prothero, and young Amelia smiling by the mill. A note on the back read, "Debt settled, 1943. This debt, Miss Marple said, was Amelia's ruin. Someone, Langley perhaps, believes it's a financial claim. That evening Miss Marple devised a plan with Colonel Melchett, whose authority could draw the shadow out. "Spread word, Colonel, that Miss Pinkerton's diaries will be presented at the village hall tomorrow, revealing all." Melchett nodded, his mustache twitching. "A trap, eh? I like it." The rumor flew, and by dusk the village buzzed. Miss Marple, Lavinia, and Tommy hid in Rose Cottage's garden, the roses a fragrant shield. At midnight, a figure approached, tall, in a green coat, limping slightly. He jimmied the cottage lock, but Melchett's constables, stationed nearby, pounced. The man was unmasked. Charles Langley, a London dealer in historical artifacts, his coat missing a hawk button. Clara Vane, caught fleeing, stood by him, her defiance frayed. In the cottage parlor, under Miss Marple's steady gaze, Langley confessed. "I traced the syndicate through old letters," he said, Amelia Croft's descendants could claim Harrington land worth millions. I used Clara to stir trouble, plant notes, copy the poison trick. Prothero knew too much. His death was a warning." Lavinia gasped. "You would kill for land?" Miss Marple held up the diary. "This name's no treasure, only pain. Amelia's claim was love, not gold." Clara, tearful, admitted planting the threatening note to silence Lavinia. The button, the gouloises, and the precise script, all Langley's. Melchett took them into custody, the diaries secured as evidence. The next day Miss Marple visited Amelia in Devon, delivering the photograph and truth. Amelia, now frail, smiled through tears. "I've forgiven them long ago. Thank you, Jane." St. Mary Mead sighed in relief, the cottage's secrets laid bare. But as Miss Marple walked home, a locket glinted in her path, engraved A.C., dropped as if by design. Inside, a tiny note, "All debts paid." No gouloises this time, but a new riddle hinting at one final truth. The village slept, its harmony fragile, and its shadows waiting for light.
Chapter 10. Dawn of Tranquility. The dawn over St. Mary Mead was a delicate watercolor, painting the village in hues of rose and gold, as if the sky itself sought to soothe the wounds of recent months. Miss Jane Marple stood at her garden gate, her breath misting in the cool August air, her fingers tracing the locket found on the path from Rose Cottage, its engraving A.C., a final echo of Amelia Croft's legacy. The locket's tiny note, "All debts paid," was a cryptic farewell, a knot in the tapestry of mysteries she'd unraveled. The blackmail note at Gossington Hall, the vicarage key, the poisoned petunias, the mill letters, the midnight break-in, the forged will, the fatal fate scone, and the wartime smuggling syndicate. Each had been stitched closed, yet the locket suggested one last secret, a thread not of malice, but of reconciliation. As the church bells tolled 7, Miss Jane Marple resolved to tie this final knot, bringing St. Mary Mead's harmony to rest. The locket's weight was slight but significant, its clasp revealing a faded photograph of a young couple, Amelia Croft and Victor Langford, their smiles bright against the sepia of wartime. The note, in a looping hand, unlike the precise inheritance script, hinted at closure, not threat. Miss Jane Marple's mind, sharp as her knitting needles, recalled Amelia's tearful forgiveness in Devon, her acceptance of the past. Could this locket be her doing, a gesture to heal old rifts? Or was another hand at play, tying up loose ends? Her morning was interrupted by a visit from Mrs. Dolly Bantry, her cheeks flushed from a brisk walk. "Jane, you'll never believe it. A parcel arrived at the lodge, addressed to the village. No sender. It's a box of letters, old ones, and they're causing a stir." Miss Jane Marple's eyes gleamed. "Letters? Let's see them, Dolly." At Bantry Lodge, the parlor was a flurry of activity. Villagers gathered around a wooden box, its lid carved with a rose motif. Inside lay dozens of envelopes, yellowed but sealed, each addressed to a St. Mary Mead family: Bantry, Harrington, Croft, Stokes, even Prothero. Mrs. Price Ridley, ever the voice of the crowd, waved one aloft. "This is to my aunt, dated 1943, from someone called a friend. What's it mean, Jane?" Miss Jane Marple opened a letter addressed to the vicarage, its contents a heartfelt apology. "To the people of St. Mary Mead, I write to right a wrong. The war made us all complicit, some in smuggling, others in silence. I carried secrets, believing them love, and paid the price. Forgive us, as I forgive you. Amelia Croft." Gasps rippled through the room.
Reverend Clements, clutching a similar note, murmured, "Amelia? She's alive?" "She is, and seeking peace. These letters are her gift, a chance to heal old wounds." The discovery sparked a village-wide quest. Miss Jane Marple proposed an assembly at the village hall, a gathering to share the letters and their truths. "No more shadows," she told Dolly. "Let's lay the past bare." The hall, adorned with faded bunting from the fete, filled with villagers by noon. Families clutched their letters, some tearful, others curious. Miss Hartnell read hers aloud, her voice trembling. "My father hid his role, fearing shame. Amelia forgives him, us." Mr. Croft, the baker, shared a note absolving his mother's unwitting part in the syndicate. Even Mrs. Prothero, widowed by poison, held a letter from Amelia, offering condolences and understanding. Miss Jane Marple stood at the podium, her lavender hat a beacon of calm. "These letters," she began, "are Amelia's reckoning. The syndicate, Stokes, Prothero, Bantry, Harrington, acted in war's shadow, believing their cause just. Amelia, betrayed, bore the weight. Her locket, left for us, is a symbol of forgiveness, not vengeance." A murmur of relief spread. Tommy Pierce, perched on a bench, raised a hand. "Miss Jane Marple, who left the locket? Was it Amelia?" She smiled, her eyes scanning the crowd. "I believe so, Tommy, but let's confirm." She'd sent a telegram to Amelia in Devon, and the reply arrived mid-assembly. "Locket mine, left to close the circle. No more debts. A.C." The villagers sighed, their burdens lifted. But Miss Jane Marple's gaze lingered on a stranger at the edge of the hall, a woman in a gray cloak, her face half hidden by a scarf. She slipped out as the reading ended, leaving a faint scent of lavender, not Gauloise. Curious, Miss Jane Marple followed, her steps silent on the grass. The woman paused by the village well, dropping a small parcel into its depths. Miss Jane Marple waited, then enlisted Tommy to retrieve it. A waterproof pouch containing a single page, a confession. "I, Eliza Bantry, aided the syndicate, knowing its cost to Amelia. I sent the letters, guided by her wish, to heal St. Mary Mead. My silence ends here." Eliza, Dolly's long-estranged aunt, had vanished after the war, guilt-ridden. Miss Jane Marple tracked her to a nearby inn, where Eliza, frail but resolute, confessed. "I found Amelia years ago, helped her write the letters. The locket was my idea, to mark the end." Miss Jane Marple nodded, her heart light. "You've done well, Eliza. The village is whole again." The assembly concluded with embraces and shared tears. Friendships mended, secrets aired. Colonel Melchett, presiding, declared, "A new chapter for St. Mary Mead, thanks to Miss Jane Marple." As dusk fell, Miss Jane Marple walked home, the locket in her hand, its note a final stitch. The village glowed, its harmony restored, no shadows left to chase. She resumed her knitting, the click of needles, a quiet hymn to peace.